I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we will cover the major news that happened this week out of Tuscaloosa. Nick Saban is retiring from the sport of college football. Set up massive ripple effects across college football, and we'll dive into what those were, how those impacted the program and other programs along the way that Florida shares a lot of ties to. And we'll wrap up with some quick hits revolving the last week and a half here of Gators news. Will, how's it going, man?
It's going well, man. It's off season, obviously, so things slow down. Now we got our national champion in Michigan, and we got obviously the news out of Alabama. So things changing rapidly in college football, not just from a conference and a team perspective. And hey, man, it's a brave new world. 12-team tournament coming up this year, and then obviously the two new members, Oklahoma and Texas, coming into the SEC, as well as some of the teams from the Pac-12 going into the Big Ten. So completely different feel heading into 2024. Hopefully that means good things for the Gators.
Well, we're also turning the page over here into 2024, right? So we got, like you said, Michigan, national champion, pretty much in control most of that game against Washington. I know Washington stuck around, made it interesting, but the Wolverines get it done with Jim Harbaugh. Official end to the 2023 football season, college football season. We're looking forward here into 2024. Will, one of the things that we do every offseason is to create a reading reaction magazine, but we have some other opportunities we want to talk to folks about.
Yeah, so I mean, like you said, we've released a Gators Preseason Magazine the past 2 years. At first, we released a digital version, and because so many people asked for it last year, we offered a hard copy. Felt like that was really successful. We did give out a few copies to folks outside of the Florida bubble, and the feedback was pretty universal. The feedback was, "I wish I had one of these for my team." So that's where we're headed. Our goal is to have one of these magazines for every Power Five team out there in 5 years. And that's not a small undertaking. And to get there, the reason we're talking about is we need your help. So we know that some of you listening own businesses that advertise. We also know that advertising with us might be considered a risk, but consider this: the revenue we're getting from advertisers is going to be used to make sure that every Gator fan with a Facebook account knows that this magazine is available. The magazine's timing is a release before Father's Day, really making it a perfect gift. Sons for their dads, sons for their grandpas, daughters for their dads. And it's the type of content that sits in a doctor's or a dentist's office for months, meaning you're getting a return on your investment beyond the initial launch, right? That it until the first kickoff happens against Miami. And quite honestly, even afterwards, if you want to call us idiots for what we wrote, the magazine has an awful lot, a long shelf life. And look, we're going to remember the people who advertised with us when it was a risk, when we have 65 schools that are covered with this magazine. And we're really determined to make this thing grow. And so you guys, the listeners, the readers, can be an integral part of it. So just, I was thinking about this, and imagine how cool it'll be in 2029 when we're launching our ACC line of magazines or whatever that conference ends up being when Florida State decides to nuke it. And you've been an integral part of building that. And I was just thinking about having Nick Knudsen being interviewed on ESPN in a few years and us being able to give a shout out to your business as being there from the start. So look, to get a copy of our pricing and media kit, you can email me at will@readandreaction.com. If you don't own a business, but you still want to help with our vision, you can help by first buying the magazine when it comes out, but also by becoming a supporter over on Patreon. That's www.patreon.com/readandreaction. And we're going to be sharing exclusive looks at the magazine as we progress this spring for anyone supporting us at the $5 a month amount or more. So it's a great place if you want to see how the magazine's coming along, how it all comes together, and certainly a place where we can interface with the people who consider themselves our fans. So, look, I'd be remiss if I didn't take this time while I'm asking for help to also say thank you. Each and every one of you who's listened to our podcast, read our articles, emailed support, or supported us by joining Patreon already or buying the magazine the last couple of years has given us faith that this is something we can build. We need your help, but we also think this is a differentiated product that we think can transform the way college football previews are done. And we'd be really humbled if you join us on that journey. So thanks so much. Appreciate you listening to the ad read here. And if there's an opportunity for us to work together, we would love it, because there'd be nothing better than a bunch of Gator fans helping us build this up into something that is beyond just Gator Nation, but started here in Gator Nation, like Gatorade. It started out as coming out of Gainesville, and now it's ubiquitous everywhere. Hopefully Read and Reaction has thought of that, 4 or 5 years from now.
Yeah, well, this is something that for someone who isn't as familiar with the magazine, what is the difference? There's a lot of college football preview magazines every year. What's the difference between a Read and Reaction preview magazine versus any other college football magazine?
Yeah, so the difference is the Read and Reaction magazine is 70 pages of just your team. So the Florida magazine is 70 pages specific to the Florida Gators. And certainly there's some stuff in there about Georgia and Alabama and stuff like that in terms of the context of how it matters to Florida. But if you pick up a Lindy's or you pick up a Phil Steele magazine or something like that, those are all great magazines, but you got maybe a page, maybe 2 pages for your specific team. So you learn a little bit about your roster, maybe kind of prepares you for who's leaving and who's coming, but nowhere near as comprehensive. And one of the things that I think we believe is that people who are out here listening to podcasts and reading articles, and really the college football diehards, are interested in going beyond just that. So last year's magazine had film studies, like plays to watch for, where we broke down plays. You could actually scan in the QR code and go to the play on YouTube and see the play while it was diagrammed in the magazine. You had a great feature where you were looking at recruiting maps and where the recruits come from. You had a great feature that I think turned out pretty prescient in terms of the transfer portal and how the transfer portal has been a place historically to sort of supplement your roster, but not build it. Obviously, with the transfer portal now, that's changing. So we'll be taking a look at that this year and seeing how that has changed. And then it's a place where we make predictions on who we think the all SEC players will be and which guys from Florida. I think the last couple of years we've had sort of percentages in terms of who we thought would be all SEC players, what was necessary to get Florida to a winning record and get Florida sort of over the hump where they've been stuck the last few years with Billy Napier. And I'm sure this year we'll have a lot of content on, look, what Napier needs to do, a lot of previews on DJ Lagway, what he did in high school, those sorts of things as well. So again, this isn't something that you give somebody who just wants to read a page, but it also is bathroom content, right? It's the kind of thing you can pick up, read a page, pick it up a couple days later, read another page. It's not like a novel you got to go all the way through. But I think you and I were, the first time we put it out, we're sort of like, we weren't quite sure how it was going to be received. And then last year, we were pretty confident that it was a really, really nice product that was put out there. We just weren't very good at distributing it. So I was sitting there, putting the things in envelopes and self-addressing the envelopes and sending them out. And so there were some delays, and we needed people to pre-order and those sorts of things. We're trying to avoid that, and really that's what we're going to be using the funds for, is making sure that we've got our distribution channels all set up so that we're not limited in terms of how many we can sell. The goal is to sell 5,000 or 6,000 magazines this year coming up. That's the goal. And we'll see whether we can achieve that. But certainly you folks out there can help us do that if you feel so inclined, and would love to have you reach out to us if you do.
Yeah, we believe in this product, but one of the reasons we do believe in it is because we've received tremendous support for these last couple of years. So I know Will said it, but I want to echo it, so I'm saying it too. Really grateful for everybody out there that has supported this endeavor so far, and we will be releasing a 2024 preseason magazine coming out. And we usually target Memorial Day, Will, right? We're shooting for Memorial Day. That tends to be the date because we like to have that out before Father's Day. So keep an eye out for further announcements. Like Will said, if you want any further information about advertising, please give me your email, Will.
Will@readandreaction.com. Or if you go over to @WillMilesSEC on X, formerly Twitter, you can direct message me there and I'll get back to you.
All right. Well, good start there, Will. Let's dive into the tectonic move that just rocked the sport. Forget the fact in pro football we had Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick making moves last week too. So a lot of figures from the football world of the last couple decades making moves this past week. But Nick Saban, he let Michigan enjoy about what do we got, 36 hours of the limelight before he took over. Michigan leads from start to finish. Harbaugh breaks through, gets the title. Bo Schembechler, the legendary Wolverine coach, never won a title. Harbaugh gets it done as former quarterback. And like I said, the Wolverines, they enjoyed 36 hours of the limelight before Saban rocked college football by announcing his retirement after 17 seasons at Alabama. Throughout his career, 7 national titles, 6 at Bama, 11 SEC championships, 9 at Bama, 13 consecutive seasons of 11-2 or better. 10 or more wins 16 times in 17 seasons. He went 10-3 in 2010 and then only lost 3 or more games that first season. So 2 times in 17 seasons did he lose 3 or more games. 2 undefeated seasons, 4 Heisman winners, Ingram, Henry, Smith, and Young. Nick Saban did not have a losing record across his 28-year career and produced 49 first-round NFL draft picks. Saban dominated the sport. As much as I love college football, and it's always sad to see a legend go, but there's part of you, Will, where this just creates a lot of space. And it's not to say Alabama's going to go anywhere, right? Alabama's Alabama, and they're always going to be a good program. But this creates a void in college football like we have not seen in some time. And it's going to be fascinating to see what happens going forward. But let's keep the focus on Saban for a minute. Unbelievable career, complete legend, best to ever do it. There's so much you could say about him. Hangs it up, and he'll be hanging around the program, but not expecting to see Nick Saban on a college football sideline again.
No, I mean, I think you leave Alabama because you're done, right? And he sort of indicated that was it. He didn't have the energy at 72 to give what he thought he could have given a decade ago, right? And so it was time for him to walk away. And certainly on the recruiting trail, it didn't seem like that energy had been dissipated at all. But look, yes, from the standpoint of first off, from a Saban perspective, the guy changed the way college football was run. His whole process, and I've been talking about this now for a few months when we've been talking about Napier and what does he do that's differentiated. And the thing about Napier, or the thing about Saban, is nobody was doing the process and the apparatus around recruiting before Nick Saban came into Alabama. Now, Kirby Smart, I think, has taken a lot of those things and sort of applied them and maybe even amplified them in some cases. But Saban is the first guy who really came in and said, look, recruiting is the major edge. And if I beat everybody doing that, then I'm going to be able to build a behemoth at this particular place. And he was able to build the funds and the funding and all the different stuff that was necessary in order to do that at Alabama. And look, Alabama's kind of an easy place to win if you've got the kind of hype that Saban did coming in from the Miami Dolphins. At the same time, you got to execute, and Saban was able to do that. I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago looking at sort of the cream of the crop in the SEC. And the big thing is that they avoided one-score games. Spurrier, Kirby Smart, and Nick Saban, and then Urban Meyer are the 4 who've really sort of avoided the one-score games overall. But Spurrier in non-one-score wins was only won 87%, and only, quote unquote. Smart's won 91%. Meyer won 88%. Saban won 96% of his games. So basically, when it was either close and Alabama lost by a touchdown or less, or they beat them by more than 8, is sort of what happened for Saban. I don't ever really recall games where Alabama was getting beat by 4 touchdowns. It just didn't happen, right? And you look around college football, and that happened all the time. And I think, honestly, I think Kalen DeBoer is probably going to do a pretty nice job. At the same time, 50% of the games that he's coached in so far at Washington were one-score games. So he's got big shoes to fill. He's going to obviously have more talent at Alabama than he did at Washington, but there are only so many Steve Spurriers around. There are only so many Urban Meyers around. Florida has certainly learned that over the last decade or so, and there's only one Nick Saban. And so that's what Alabama's dealing with right now. Is it's not necessarily that DeBoer isn't even going to be great. It's that great is not the benchmark that Saban has set for Alabama. Greatest is what Saban has set as the benchmark for Alabama. And I don't think anyone's going to be able to replicate that. So you think about where the SEC's been, having these 2 behemoths up at the top, Alabama and Georgia, for the past few years. I would suspect Alabama's going to take steps back from time to time. And so all of a sudden the SEC has a pathway where Alabama's just not penciled in as the number 1 team in the country. I mean, I was looking at the stat since I think 2008, Saban has had a team ranked number 1 in the country every year except for his first year and his last year. Those are the only 2 years where he didn't at one point along the way have a team ranked number 1 in the country. And I'm not sure we're ever going to see that kind of dominance again. This is something where it's like, yeah, I mean, I think we all look at it and say it's the recruiting apparatus. I think people will even look at it and say, question whether he's even really that great a coach. I think that's kind of ridiculous given the fact that the dude won with the Browns as a defensive coordinator. But I think that there's a hole. There is a hole in the SEC, which means there's an opportunity in the SEC, which means the reason we're talking about is Florida has an opportunity to take advantage of that hole in the SEC. And we'll see whether Billy Napier and company is able to do that.
It wasn't just the turnover on the field year to year, it was the turnover off the field that he seemed to be able to replace. You look back at Florida's latest batch of great teams. Hey, when Dan Mullen took off for Mississippi State that last year Urban was here, that offense looked quite different the next year, right? They've been able to just what's been amazing with Saban is they've just been able to not have that one off year where they miss a beat. Unbelievable run by the Crimson Tide. We've seen many players hit the portal already. I'm assuming some of that will settle down in the coming days, but some key players certainly have already made commitments elsewhere. I saw Isaiah Bond was already committed to Texas, for example. Looking to see some other names probably jump in the coming days, but that's to be expected with any coaching turnover in the transfer portal era. So after Saban decides to retire, you immediately look to a lot of the Saban assistants out there, which there are some notable names out there in college football right now, right? Kirby Smart, Lane Kiffin, Sarkisian at Texas, Lanning, Cristobal, Napier, Loxley, Key, Huff, McElwain, all these guys coached under Saban. Not all these guys were discussed for the Alabama job, just demonstrating the influence of Nick Saban among the head coaching ranks in college football. I did see a great tweet, though, from David Wunderlich at Gator Country. He said, you know who didn't hire a former Saban assistant? Alabama. Found that to be pretty interesting. Well, I see, guys, Florida has hired a few Saban assistants over the last decade here, but the Alabama coaching search, it started by making Oregon fans very nervous, very stressed about losing the third coach to the South since 2017. So some Ducks fans were probably on edge for a couple of days, but there was even talk about Dan Lanning being in Tuscaloosa. Turned out to not be the case. And he put out a great video announcing that he was staying to the team. And the tagline was, if you're scared your coach is leaving, then come play for us. Great tagline. Until Kirby takes that Falcons job, right? And Lanning goes back to Georgia. You want to get that? Come on, Falcons. Come through, baby. Come through for us. So there was surprisingly little conversation around Steve Sarkisian, which makes me think that he put that to bed pretty early. I would have thought Sarkisian would have been a serious candidate for that. I did not think Norvell was going to get as much run as he did publicly, but maybe he was getting that much run internally in Tuscaloosa, or maybe Jimmy Sexton's his agent. I don't know, Will. Either way, 8 years and $80 million were enough to shut that conversation down. Norvell puts out a tweet saying he's happy to stay at Florida State. And finally, or more likely, when Jimmy said it was okay, Washington head coach Kalen DeBoer emerged and was ultimately named the successor to Nick Saban, and is going to have one of the biggest challenges we've seen in the modern era of college football, attempting to live up to what Nick Saban built in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think DeBoer I think he knows what he's getting into. I certainly think he's being compensated for what he's getting into. But the other thing that's interesting is it's not just the Wunderlich tweet where he says, guess who didn't go out and hire an Alabama former assistant coach? It's that DeBoer does some things that are differentiated, or at least has done some things that are a little bit outside the box. So bringing in a high-level transfer like Michael Penix to start out, very similar to Lanning at Oregon, bringing in Bo Nix. But the fact that he was able to get that guy to hit and that he's been able to have offenses, no matter where he's been, that have been successful is the complete opposite of Nick Saban, right? Who comes into Alabama from the Miami Dolphins as a defensive specialist, and they're winning championships with Greg McElroy and Blake Sims and Jake Coker and all that sort of stuff. But it was run and pound, and it was have play action with a game manager quarterback and a defense that was just unbelievable is how he built the program. I think if you tried to go back to that well, you're going to struggle. And so I like the fact, I mean, just from a, not as a Florida fan, but I like the fact that they've gone outside the box. And look, DeBoer might fail and he might just crash and burn, but you're never going to find out without taking risks. And you need people who are doing things that are differentiated and give you edges. And you no longer have the edge of Nick Saban walking into a room and flashing 7 rings and saying, come to Alabama. Apparently Dodge is no longer releasing a Charger, so you no longer have that as the advantage that that Alabama
What
may
would
have had
that
over the
have to
last
do
few
with
years.
Alabama football,
Has
Will?
nothing at all to do with
Come
Alabama
on,
football.
man.
I allegedly. But you're getting a guy who's like what 110 and 20 or something in his career. Now a lot of that is at lower divisions and things like that, but DeBoer's won a lot. So if Florida had been making a coaching change, certainly DeBoer would have been high up on the list for Gator fans in terms of who they wanted to come in. The same names that we all heard would have been the ones who came in. And I think if there's one legacy that Nick Saban has brought to college football fans, I hope the thing that he's brought is that he was not stagnant. He did not sit there and say, this is my system and I'm not going to change. When he got ripped by Johnny Manziel, they went out and started recruiting different kinds of linebackers. When they realized that Jake Coker was good enough to win him a national championship back when he did, but not good enough to win him a national championship with what was coming, they went out and started bringing in guys like Jalen Hurts and guys like Tua. And then they brought in Lane Kiffin to be the offensive coordinator, regardless of how much that killed Nick Saban to have Kiffin on his staff. And it was funny because when Kiffin's name was brought up, a lot of what you heard behind the scenes was he burned way too many bridges in Tuscaloosa to be considered for this. At the same time, they didn't just go and say, well, we're going to bring in Kiffin, because look, Kiffin is already doing do you need an Ole Miss imitation, I guess, from Lane Kiffin? They decided they didn't need that. And I think that's one of the reasons why Sarkisian is probably not there as well. As you look at it and you say, you could always, like, Sark will be available 3 years from now if the board doesn't work out. So it's not as though it's a huge risk to go with somebody else. But look, I think if you're Alabama, you got to be realistic. Like, you had Gene Stallings, who was good but not great, won some SEC championships, won a national championship, but nothing like Nick Saban. But then you had the Dennis Franchione, you had the Mike DeBose, you had those guys coming in. Again, Alabama would pop up and win an SEC title every once in a while, which seems like not a whole lot, or seems like that would be significant. At the same time, compared to Saban, it all pales in comparison. And I think that's sort of where we're at now, is that Alabama has a history that is going to make it attractive. But if they make enough mistakes, eventually you'll get to a point where none of the kids who they're recruiting remember Alabama being this Alabama under Nick Saban, because that's where we're headed with Florida right now. None of the kids who are committing to Florida or any of these SEC schools remember Florida being Florida under Urban Meyer. They were all too young.
I think we've been there for some time, Will.
Yeah, but it's not that hard to get there, I guess, is my point.
Mm-hmm.
So, look, I think obviously a seismic shift. Saban changed the game. I'm interested to see what DeBoer ends up doing. I actually think it's a good risk for Alabama. But I think it all also depends on expectations. If you expect him to be another Saban and be there for 18 years and win 5 national championships, if he does that, then good on him. But I don't think that's a reasonable expectation. I think if DeBoer wins a national championship while he's at Alabama, he's probably met my expectations. But one national championship in the next 5 or 6 years ain't going to be enough for the people in Tuscaloosa. So good luck.
I would say so that I said 2 times in the Saban era, 3 or more losses. Well, that last time, Will, it was in 2010. So you're saying 2011 beyond here, they haven't had more than 2 losses in a season.
Just look at Ohio State, right? Urban Meyer leaves. Ryan Day is he's lost like 9 games total in his career there at Ohio State, and people are asking, is he on the hot seat?
Ridiculous.
Because he's been struggling against Jim Harbaugh, who's about to probably get hired into the NFL and just won a national championship. Yeah. So, the reality is once those expectations get set, the fans don't get more reasonable, and the expectations are still, we know we can win championships at this level. We know we can perform at this level. And so we expect you to get you there. So you think about the churn we've seen at Florida, that churn is just as likely to happen at Alabama, given the amount of money that flows through that place and the influence that some of the boosters have. And honestly, if you look at the dysfunction that's happened at Auburn over the past decade or so, it's not like it's that far removed from Alabama in terms of the people there, which really means that Saban, one of the things that he was able to do was get everybody aligned and headed in the same direction. Now, maybe they've realized that's the best way to go, and they'll be able to keep that alignment for DeBoer. But I think that's going to be a big part of what he does, is he's going to have to come in and make sure that there aren't any rogue actors out there who are undermining what he's doing. He promised 100% access to Saban. Well, there's some danger in that too, right? Because 100% access to Saban means 100% access to people who had Saban's ear, and now all of a sudden you've got multiple factions going in different directions. There's always a risk when you change, but look, I mean, Alabama's had an awesome run. They've had their time in the sun. It's time for them to come down with the LSUs and the Texas A&Ms of the world, have a couple of 8-win seasons and experience it, because I'm not going to weep for any Alabama fan for about 30 years after this run they've had now.
No, I don't think I'll weep in my lifetime, but I would like to see what reasonable expectations look like in Alabama. That would be
There won't be reasonable
that would be an
expectations. They're going to
interesting
be completely unreasonable.
Yeah, I do think this is a great opportunity for DeBoer, obviously, to step into something to keep it rolling. As a Florida fan, I am concerned. It was nice having Alabama as a solid counterweight to what Georgia's doing right now. I'd like Florida to be that counterweight, but we got a little work to do to get there. So it will be interesting to see if Georgia takes even another step forward. How are we feeling about the impact on Georgia with this shift with Alabama? Do we see an immediate shift upward with them, or hey, it's a 12-team playoffs. They're making the playoffs every year anyway.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that sort of is at least the silver lining in all this, is that Alabama has been the bulwark that's kept Georgia from just dominating for the past decade. Because, I mean, you think about the Tua throw that wins the national championship for Alabama, prevents Georgia from making it, beating them in the SEC championship this year, knocks them out of the playoff, and gives them the opportunity to embarrass Florida State. All of those things combined, without Alabama and the SEC, Georgia is essentially having a run like Nick Saban had, 10, 15 years ago, where just there's nobody who can stop them. With a 12-team playoff, well, now they're going to have to play a real schedule, right? You don't get to play a schedule like they played this year. And then, if they'd have won that SEC championship game, they would have only had to win 2 games essentially in the SEC championship to get into to win the national championship. Now they'll have to play a real schedule. And I think, one, they have a real SEC schedule next year, given what they had this year. But also, when you get into that 12-team playoff, I mean, maybe you get the bye, but you're still going to have to win multiple games to get there. There's always an opportunity for people to upset you. And I think we'll see that a little bit going forward. I think there's going to be some variance in those top 12 games that we haven't necessarily seen before, because, you think about like a Pac-12 team that gets in maybe isn't that great just because the Pac-12 is down, but they end up in a 4-team playoff. We saw that with TCU a couple of years ago, right? They get in, they beat Michigan. I mean, they deserve to be there. They beat Michigan, but then came up against the Georgia buzzsaw and just got absolutely demolished. Same thing for Michigan a couple of years ago. Go through a Big Ten. Big Ten's kind of down. Come and face Georgia and just absolutely get destroyed. A bunch of teams like Notre Dame and Washington and even Clemson, once when they had Kelly Bryant, came up against the SEC buzzsaw and lost there as well. I think there will be some opportunities for some of these teams who are ranked, 8th, 9th, 10th. Teams like LSU, who've given Alabama a run in this entire landscape, are going to be able to do the same thing for Georgia, because it's not just going to be, hey, you got through the SEC, you have to face these guys again. It's going to be they're on the other side of the bracket if you get all the way through. So if the SEC is really the best conference, then, and I do look forward to the day that we have a Final Four of just SEC teams with this 12-team playoff, because it's going to happen. You're going to end up with a Final Four, because they're going to try to keep them on opposite sides of the bracket so they don't have to play each other every year. And so, or, in the playoff and knock each other out. We're going to get a Final Four SEC tournament at some point, and I'm going to enjoy every minute of it when it happens.
Well, we do have the rest of the offseason to break this down, but monumental news in college football this week with Nick Saban stepping down at Alabama, heading toward retirement. Will, let's wrap up here with some quick hits. Let's try to do 5 to 10 seconds on each topic here. We're going to start with the recent portal additions. Pup Howard, linebacker out of Jacksonville, went to South Carolina, got away last year. Got him this year in orange and blue. Transfers from South Carolina into Florida. Much needed position at linebacker.
Yeah, well, especially with Nunnery leaving recently, and and Scooby Williams as well. Florida needs linebackers. They've certainly prioritized defense when it comes to the transfer portal, at least recently. So good to see a highly skilled linebacker coming in, but His PFF score last year, overall 58.8, was below average. Granted, as a true freshman, but they're going to need him to pop forward. Now, Scooby Williams was down in the 40s, so you're getting an upgrade from Howard, or from Williams to Howard. And so, hopefully that continues and he can even up his play from there.
George Gums comes in from Northern Illinois, NIU. Was a tight end his first 2 seasons, switched to defensive end. 12 games, he had 6.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks.
Yeah, this is a Human Mealan replacement, obviously. Again, PFF at 61, so well below Human Mealan in terms of overall rating. But Florida needed an edge. They need depth there. I think they're going to be looking for guys like TJ Searcy to step up there at the edge position. Certainly Justice Boone as well. They're going to be expecting to get some pass rush from him as well. So Gums is probably more of a depth piece. But, look, they needed to replace a guy at that position. They were short on edge rushers last year. And with Human Mealan leaving, certainly short on them as well this year.
Another defensive player capable of stepping in, giving some immediate playing time. TJ Douglas comes in from Tulane. Was a Bama walk-on, productive player for the Green Wave the last couple seasons.
Yeah, based on PFF rankings, above average play at the safety position. So the only guy who was above average for Florida last year was Jordan Castell. So you put Castell with Douglas back there at the safety position. You've now got 2 above average safeties. Certainly a positive thing for Florida, considering that you need at least above average safety and corner play in order to be successful in the SEC and really have even a top 50 defense. Top 20 defense, you need guys who are elite players. So hopefully Douglas can adapt into one, or can develop into one of those guys. But just getting above average play at both of those positions would be a major deal for Florida.
I know you mentioned a couple of these names with a few of the guys leaving in the portal. Richie Leonard to Florida State. Will this should be illegal? I think we should all lock in an agreement that anyone that wears orange and blue should never go to Florida State, should never go to Georgia, should never go to Miami, and maybe let's tack on Tennessee for good measure. I can live with an LSU transfer. Don't love it. I can live with it, but Florida State, come on, man. Orange and blue over to Florida State. That's tough. I know he had some back and forth with the fans on Twitter this weekend. Richie, that's not an argument you're going to win, man. Just leave that one alone. Just leave that one alone. Go do your thing. Go play ball at FSU. But I really think that I'm tired of these rivals, the rival switching. Will, I can't take it. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, so slightly above average play for Richie Leonard last year. Played 785 or 775 snaps, though. So the most snaps on the offensive line for the Gators. You were hoping he'd come in, be a stable part of, continuity on the offensive line we're always talking about, and be able to provide that. The Florida State transfer, I think actually this is maybe where some of the juice is going to come from now when it comes to the rivalries. So one of the things that really killed college basketball is, you don't have the Grant Hills at Duke anymore who were there for 4 years. You're not going to have anybody anywhere for 4 years now at the transfer portal. So perhaps one of the things that's going to maintain the rivalries beyond just the 4 years of hating the opposition that you play for them and you eventually have to overcome them is going to be that you've got guys like Trevor Etienne transferring to Georgia. You've got guys like Richie Leonard transferring to Florida State. There's going to be some bad blood between the organizations when that sort of stuff happens. So as long as Florida's able to hold their own and bring guys in from some of those SEC schools as well, then it won't be a problem. Again, is this a guy who's like a giant upgrade for Florida State? I don't know. I think he's a solid player. I'd be surprised if he ends up playing 8-9 years in the NFL. I can see him as an undrafted free agent. If he plays well next year, maybe he ends up on the back end of the draft. But, certainly the problem with him leaving is that Florida has to replace him now, right? And that's the thing is if he was above average last year, you got to replace him with somebody who's above average to get the same level of play. And considering all the other guys on the offensive line, you want to keep the guys who are at least playing at an average level or above.
Yeah, we prefer him coming back to play for us and not going to play for Florida State, right? I think that's pretty clear. But new day and age is what it is. I'll stop talking about kids being on my lawn. I'll move on.
Go pull a bunch of guys from Alabama and Georgia, and we'll.
I don't want Georgia guys. Let's make it consistent. I don't want any Bulldogs, Knowles, Canes, Vols. We don't need any of those down at Florida either. Let's just be consistent both ways on that. No player should ever wear both of those uniforms.
I just don't care.
It's going to be my old man take. I'm going to die on that hill. I'm going to die on that hill. So
I just don't care as long as Florida has net upgrades, right? So if Richie Leonard goes to Florida State, who can we yank from Florida State who was better than Richie Leonard? And as long as there's a net upgrade, I'm cool with it. It's just the way it is these days.
I'll be consistent both ways. I
Oh,
don't want him. Don't take ours. We won't take yours.
Well, and I'm being consistent both ways too, because I'm saying I don't care where Leonard goes, other than when he's on Florida State. I'm obviously going to root against him, and it's at this point it just is what it is. So let's win the game, right?
anywhere
Same
but
thing. Like
anywhere but four schools. Anywhere but four schools. Will I'm not asking much. I'm not asking much here.
all
I
right,
get what you're
well,
saying. Scooby and Jaden Hill. You mentioned Scooby A&M. Jaden Hill's joining them over at A&M.
yeah, okay. Scooby well below average last year. They put him in some tough situations, but the idea that, as a junior with 450 or a redshirt sophomore with 455 snaps, his PFF ranking was 42.1. The average for linebackers is up in the 60s. So really poor play from Scooby overall last year. Jaden Hill was below average at the corner position, good on run defense, pretty good on pass rush, poor when it came to coverage skills. I think most people would say that passes the eye test in terms of what they saw. I said this a few weeks ago when he decided to enter the portal is, who like is Jaden Hill part of a championship starting unit? I think that's what you got to start asking about when guys transfer. If you get all upset, go, oh, that guy was a solid depth piece. It's like, all right, but was he part of a championship roster? And that's how I'm going to evaluate all of these things. So I think Jaden Hill's a pretty good player. I think he can bring value to a team. I don't know that he's a starting corner or a starting slot corner on a championship level SEC team. And he may prove me wrong. In some ways, I hope he proves me wrong because I hope he does really, really well. But as long as he's not playing Florida, but thus far we haven't seen that. Same thing for Scooby. I don't think that based on what he's shown us on the field so far that he's a starting linebacker for a championship level team. And so wish him well, and hopefully Florida can bring in somebody who's already performed better and certainly has the potential to perform better as well.
Three other starters from last season: Mazuka to Nebraska, Kimber to Penn State, Mitchell to Arkansas. Miguel Mitchell goes over to Arkansas. Mazuka, that was the guy I was very excited about in the transfer portal last year. Didn't quite live up to the hype, in my opinion. Would have liked to seen him back for another year, though, to see how he develops. I still think he has potential going to Nebraska.
Yeah, well, I mean, so his PFF rating was 69. He was above average. He wasn't as good as he was at Baylor the year before, but again, new scheme. He was injured a lot during spring and fall. Then there was sort of a controversy where he announced that he was transferring and then decided to stay. So obviously there was a little bit of consternation going on there as well. Got suspended for the fight against Tennessee, which at least was an entertaining moment for all of us as we were watching that at the end. So look, Nebraska, that's not one of your four schools, so we should be fine with it. Wish him well. And look, we're going to have continuity concerns on the offensive line this year, certainly. But, he is a guy who could have been a starter on an SEC level team. So that's somebody that you'd like to have back and like to see what he could develop over time.
Manny Nuttering, you also mentioned heading in the portal as well. We'll move on. Ron Roberts hired on the staff, former Baylor assistant coach, been all around college football. He's with he was with Auburn last year. I would say I believe he was influential in Patrick Toney's career. He worked with Napier at Louisiana as well. So this is a guy, longtime assistant in college football, has had some notable stops along the way. Will, another addition here this offseason to Napier's defensive staff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. You could read into this what you believe, right? I think there are people who are going to look at this and they're going to go, this is an admission that Austin Armstrong was not ready to take the reins of the defense. I think there are other people who will say, when you get an opportunity to bring in a guy like Roberts who has experience with this sort of system, that's not the kind of guy that you would pass up. And given that Billy Napier needs to win games this year, and given that certainly the moves that they've made have less to do with recruiting and more to do with development, I think Ron Roberts makes a lot of sense in that respect. He did a great job at multiple stops. When he was at Baylor, he did a good job with the defense. When he was at Louisiana, he did a good job with the defense there. Certainly was a mentor to Patrick Toney, but was also a security blanket for Billy Napier as he was growing into that head coaching role there at Louisiana. So, look, I think whenever you can add a guy with this kind of experience, especially for a team that had so many issues with readiness, preparation, mechanics, just the day-to-day stuff, I think it's probably a very solid add. And you suspect, or I suspect, that that there was the blessing of Austin Armstrong in terms of bringing him in, but it does mean you have another strong voice in the room, right? You got a guy who's been a defensive coordinator and the sole defensive voice for years now, and he's coming in and he's not going to be that sole voice. So that'll be the question: is how can he and Armstrong coexist? How can they work together? And how can they utilize the skills that Roberts brings while still allowing Armstrong to be the independent defensive coordinator that he needs to be and he needs to grow into, to make sure that there's a coherent voice and a coherent message and a coherent vision being communicated to the defensive players? Can they do that? I think it's possible. Will they do that? I think we'll see. We said all last year the defense can't possibly be worse, and then it was. And so, I've learned my lesson. I'm not going to say that again this year. But what I'm going to say is that the dysfunction that the fact that Spencer goes to A&M and Corey Raymond, that those guys were gone right away after the season, that they didn't even wait until the early signing day, suggests that there was some consternation within the staff. And so if everything's a little bit more copacetic, then hopefully that'll lead to better results on the field.
Quarterback Jack Miller, not totally unexpected here, no longer with the team. Quarterback room with DJ Lackway coming in suddenly crowded. Miller really only got one opportunity, transfer from Ohio State, got one opportunity to start for the Gators, and that was in that Las Vegas Bowl against Oregon State. Not the best opportunity for Miller, but it never seemed like the timing was going to line up with him. So not terribly surprising that he's not with the program.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty obvious from the start that Miller was not the guy who we expected to be the starter, that if he was going to be the starter, that was probably going to be a problem given his high school profile, given what he had done at Ohio State, and given what we saw during the spring games. There just wasn't really a development pathway that made you confident that he was going to be a big time starter in the SEC. And then, like you mentioned, the game that he got into, not necessarily fair. At the same time, at the same time, you got to perform when you get an opportunity. He got the opportunity. He wasn't able to perform, missed some throws in that particular game. And so, I think obviously we don't see what happens in the actual practices nearly as much as we'd like to. At the same time, I think the fact that he really got surpassed by, Kitna, by Jalen Kitna, and then the fact that he got surpassed by Max Brown suggests that there just wasn't going to be a spot for him, right? And so, Florida's already gone out and found a guy in the portal who's going to come in. I didn't see his name earlier, but I saw it flash across my timeline that Florida's got another quarterback coming in. And
is it Clay Millen?
Yep, Clay Millen. So from Colorado State, so they got him coming in, and I think I don't know a whole lot about Millen, but wish Jack Miller well, but certainly I would suspect that the performance in practice wasn't there, and so there's a reason why he's looking for a different place to stay.
Last one out of this last minute here, because we're recording Sunday evening, but class of 2025 wide receiver Josiah Abdula commits to the Gators. A lot of breakaways in that huddle footage. Of course, you want to see that from guys committed to the University of Florida, especially guys playing wide receiver, but a lot of breakaways, a lot of good action on short routes, runs a lot of slants in that offense. First wide receiver pickup for the Gators here in the class of 2025, Will.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's a 3-star guy. Certainly a lot of the film that you see suggests that he might be somebody who rises up the boards. I think generally when Florida has brought in wide receivers so far, they've been pretty successful under Billy Napier. We saw obviously Trey Wilson showed out this year. The expectation, and Ricky Pearsall was somebody who was brought in as a transfer. Those guys have delivered. And so the question is going to be, can they get more delivery from guys like Mizell, guys like Andy Jean, continue to get the delivery from some of the new guys that they brought in this recruiting class, and then supplementing those guys with the 2025 class. You evaluate a class, I say this all the time, you evaluate it based on the holistic, the entire body of work in a class. You need guys like this to deliver in a recruiting class in order for your program to be successful. You also need 5 stars to deliver in order to make your recruiting class successful. So, we see a 3-star commit and everybody goes, oh, well, it's just a 3-star. No. Like, think about the Golden State Warriors. They get Klay Thompson, they get Steph Curry there in the first round. They get Draymond Green in the second round. That's what makes that team a championship team. Now, they'd be a good team if they had Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, but they became a great team when ironically Draymond Green came in for Gator David Lee, and that's when they became the Warriors. And you got to hit on those guys in the second round of the NBA to be successful, and you got to hit on those guys in the 3, 4, 500 range in order to be successful in college football. There's only a couple of programs that have 5-star stacked after 5-star stacked after 5-star, and even the Alabamas of the world end up with Mac Jones coming in as a 3-star quarterback and showing out with an offense is just fantastic. So look, this guy, you hope he can be a successful part of the program moving forward. Certainly, like you mentioned, his huddle his huddle film looks like he brings some unique skills to the fore. And given the evaluation of the staff so far, I'm excited to see what he can do.
We were calling it quick hits. We'll go with semi-quick hits.
Yeah, nobody could shut me up. We should have known better.
We'll do some work. It's early in the off season. First off season episode, technically, right after college football is over. So we'll work on that. Will, back to the magazine real quick. If anyone wants to reach out to you with any questions or more, wants more information for the advertising, where do they reach you?
Yep. So Will at readandreaction.com. We have a media kit we'll send you with pricing, with numbers, all that sort of stuff. So you can at least see what you're buying into. But a big part of it is buying into this vision, right? The vision of having 65 preseason magazines that are out there with 65 or 70 pages for every single program. And 5 years from now, that's where we want to be. We want to have this be our thing, our brand, have it out there, and you all can be a big part of it. And so we appreciate the support. And certainly if you have questions, send them my way.
Yeah, feel free on Twitter to either DM Will or myself any point, and we'll get back to you. Like I said, first episode of the off season. Will, it's weird. It's weird that the season's finally over, but here we are heading full steam ahead to spring practice. First, we got signing day here in February to finish off this class, so that's coming up here in a few weeks. But other than that, full speed ahead towards spring practice. Looking forward to being with y'all all off season. Will and I will still be releasing episodes every single week here on YouTube and wherever you can get your podcasts. For Will Miles, I'm Nick Knudsen. Have a great week, everybody, and go Gators.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Stand Up and Holler. If you're interested in more information from me and Nick, you can go over to readandreaction.com. You can like and subscribe our YouTube channel here at Read and Reaction. Or you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction to support us, get extra information, and we do Ask Anythings over there every once in a while as well. So check us out. Thanks for listening.